3 seconds. That is exactly how close Jacob Moretti, the most feared man in Chicago, came to dying in a crowded jazz club. He had the money, the power, and the guards, but none of that mattered against a single drop of tasteless, odorless poison. The only thing standing between the dawn of the Moretti syndicate and a premature grave was a 23-year-old waitress named Elleraine. When she leaned in and whispered, "Don't drink that run now," she didn't just save a life, she started a war. But why did she do it? And more importantly, how did a struggling waitress know exactly what was in the glass? The answer is darker than you think. This is the story of the whisper that shook the underworld. The Obsidian Room was the kind of place where silence cost more than the champagne. Tucked away on North Rush Street in Chicago, it was a fortress of velvet and mahogany, designed for men who made decisions that shifted stock markets and ended bloodlines. Jacob Moretti sat in the back booth, the one permanently reserved for ownership. At 34, Jacob didn't look like the stereotypical mob boss. He wore tailored Italian wool, not flashy silk. He didn't smoke cigars. He ran ultra-marathons. They called him the architect because he didn't just break legs. He dismantled organizations from the inside out. Tonight, however, he was tired. Across from him sat Lorenzo De Luca, his underboss and oldest friend. Lorenzo was the muscle to Jacob's brain, a man with a laugh like a grinding engine and hands the size of shovels. "You're overthinking it, Jules," Lorenzo said, swirling his whiskey. "The shipment from the unrecognizable port in Newark is secure. The Russians are backing off. Relax. Have a drink." Lorenzo signaled the bar. That was the first mistake. Jacob never ordered from the floor. He had a private bottle. But tonight, to appease his friend, he nodded. Elleraine Vance smoothed the front of her black uniform. She had been working at the Obsidian for 3 weeks. She was invisible, a ghost with a tray. That's how she liked it. Invisibility was safe. Invisibility kept her hidden from the debt collectors hunting her father. She picked up the tray from the service bar. The bartender was new, a guy named Rick with nervous eyes and a sheen of sweat on his upper lip despite the air conditioning. "Table 4. Moretti," Rick said, his voice tight. Elleraine looked at the crystal tumbler. A double Scotch neat, nothing unusual. But as she lifted the tray, the light from the overhead chandelier hit the glass. There was a film, a microscopic oily dispersion floating on the amber liquid. Elleraine froze. She wasn't just a waitress. 2 years ago, she had been top of her class in organic chemistry at Northwestern before her father's gambling addiction forced her to drop out and work double shifts. She knew density. She knew solubility. Scotch doesn't separate like that, unless something hydrophobic had been added. Something like pure liquid aconite. She looked at Rick. He was wiping a glass, but his eyes were locked on Jacob Moretti across the room. He was shaking. "He's going to kill him," Elleraine realized. The thought hit her with the force of a physical blow. She should walk away. If she intervened, she was dead. If she spilled it, she was fired. But if she let him drink it, she was an accessory to murder. She walked toward the booth. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every step felt like walking through wet concrete. Jacob was laughing at something Lorenzo said. He looked relaxed, human. Elleraine placed the napkin down. She set the glass in front of him. Lorenzo stopped talking, watching the glass land. His anticipation was subtle, but to Elleraine it was screaming. Lorenzo wasn't looking at Jacob. He was looking at the drink. "It's a coup." Jacob reached for the glass. His fingers brushed the crystal. Elaine didn't think. She leaned in, pretending to adjust the napkin, bringing her lips inches from Jacob's ear. The scent of sandalwood and gun oil filled her nose. "Don't drink that," she whispered, her voice a tremor. "Run now. The back exit." Jacob froze. His hand hovered over the glass. He didn't flinch. He didn't look at her. He was a predator who had just heard a twig snap. "Excuse me," Jacob said aloud, his voice flat, playing the role of the annoyed patron. But his eyes, steely grey and terrifyingly intelligent, locked onto hers. "It's separated," she breathed, barely moving her lips. "Look at the surface. Lorenzo is watching the glass, not you." Jacob's eyes flicked to the drink, then to Lorenzo. Lorenzo was smiling, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "What's the hold-up, sweetie? Let the man drink." Jacob picked up the glass. Elaine held her breath. "You know, Lorenzo," Jacob said, his voice casually conversational, "I think this toast requires something better. Why don't you have the first sip to loyalty?" He slid the glass across the table. The color drained from Lorenzo's face faster than water from a cracked tub. The silence that followed was deafening. I'm strictly bourbon tonight, Jules," Lorenzo stammered. "Drink it," Jacob commanded. The veneer of civilization dropped. The architect was gone. The killer was present. Lorenzo's hand went inside his jacket. "Get down!" Jacob roared. He flipped the heavy oak table onto its side just as Lorenzo drew a suppressed pistol. Thwip, thwip. 2 bullets buried themselves in the wood, right where Jacob's chest had been. Chaos erupted. Screams tore through the jazz club. Patrons dove under tables. Jacob didn't scramble. He moved with terrifying efficiency. He grabbed Elaine by the wrist, a grip like iron, and yanked her behind the overturned table. "You said back exit," Jacob growled, pulling his own weapon, a sleek Sig Sauer, from a shoulder holster. "Lead!" "Kitchen!" Elaine gasped, her ears ringing. "Through the pantry." "Go." They moved low. Jacob fired 2 shots over the barricade, controlled precise. He wasn't spraying bullets. He was suppressing the enemy. Lorenzo shouted orders, and 3 other men in the club stood up with weapons drawn. It was an ambush, a full-scale execution. Elaine scrambled through the swinging doors of the kitchen, Jacob right on her heels. The kitchen staff was screaming, cowering against the ovens. "Out! Everybody out!" Jacob yelled. They sprinted past the prep stations. The back door was ahead. "Wait!" Jacob stopped abruptly, grabbing Elaine's shoulder. The door handle was turning. "They covered the exit," Jacob hissed. He looked at Elaine. "Is there another way?" "The garbage chute," she said, her eyes wide. "It dumps into the alley, but it's steep." "Better than a bullet." Jacob kicked the chute open. "Ladies first." Elaine didn't hesitate. She threw herself into the darkness of the metal slide. She tumbled, hitting old coffee grounds and citrus peels, landing hard on a pile of cardboard boxes in the freezing Chicago alleyway. Jacob landed a second later, cat-like, gun raised. "Move!" he ordered. They ran down the alleyway just as the back door burst open above them. Bullets sparked against the brickwork, sending stone shrapnel flying. A black SUV screeched around the corner. Jacob's extraction team. "Get in!" Jacob shoved Elaine into the back seat and dove in after her. "Go, go, go!" he screamed at the driver. The car roared tires, smoking peeling onto the main road just as the shooters spilled into the alley. Elaine sat in the luxurious leather seat, hyperventilating her uniform stained with coffee grounds and grease. She looked at the man beside her. Jacob Moretti wasn't looking at the road. He was reloading his magazine, his face a mask of cold fury. Then he turned to her. He raised the gun, pointing it squarely at her chest. "Now," Jacob said, his voice dangerously calm. "Tell me exactly who you are and why you just saved the life of a man you should be afraid of." The interior of the armored SUV was silent, save for the hum of the engine and the frantic rhythm of Elloraine's heart. The barrel of the gun didn't waver. "I'm a waitress," Ellorraine stammered, holding her hands up. "My name is Ellorraine. Put the gun down, please." A waitress who identifies chemical separation in a Scotch glass in a dimly lit room. Jacob cocked his head. "I don't buy it. Who sent you? Was it the Russians? Did they want me alive so they could kill me themselves?" "Nobody sent me," Ellorraine shouted, fear giving way to a spark of anger. "I was a chemistry major. I saw the oil on the surface. I saw the bartender shaking. I didn't want to watch a man die." Jacob studied her face. He was a master of reading micro-expressions. He looked for the deceit, the twitch of a liar. He saw only terror and exhaustion. He lowered the gun, but didn't holster it. "Dante," Jacob spoke to the driver. "Kill the phones. We're going dark. Take us to the safe house on the pier." "Understood, boss." Dante, a massive man with a scarred neck, replied. "What about Lorenzo?" "Lorenzo is a dead man walking," Jacob said, staring out the tinted window. "He just doesn't know it yet." They drove for 20 minutes in silence. Ellorraine hugged her knees, trying to stop shivering. She had just assaulted a made man, indirectly fled a crime scene, and was now being kidnapped by the head of the Chicago Mafia. "This is it," she thought. "This is how I disappear." The car pulled into a nondescript industrial garage near Navy Pier. The heavy metal shutters rolled down behind them, sealing them in. "Get out," Jacob commanded. Ellorraine followed him into a freight elevator. It rose to the top floor, opening into a sprawling, minimalist penthouse that looked more like a fortress than a home. Floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass looked out over Lake Michigan. Jacob threw his jacket on a leather sofa. His white shirt was spotted with blood, not his own. "Sit." He pointed to a chair in the center of the room. Ellorraine sat. Jacob poured a glass of water from a pitcher and placed it in front of her. "Drink. You're in shock." Ellorraine hesitated, looking at the water. "It's not poisoned," Jacob said dryly. "If I wanted you dead, I would have left you in the alley." She drank it in one gulp. "You have a specific skill set, Ellorraine," Jacob said, pacing in front of her. "Chemistry, observation, courage under fire. Waitresses usually dive under tables. You dove into the line of fire to warn me." "I told you," she said, her voice finding some strength. "I noticed the anomaly." "Why drop out?" Jacob asked suddenly. "What, Northwestern? You said you were a chemistry major. Why are you serving drinks to scumbags at the Obsidian?" Ellorraine looked down at her hands. "Money. My father, he has debts. Bad debts. To bad people." "Which people? Does it matter? Everything matters." "The Russo family," she whispered. Jacob stopped pacing. He let out a dark, humorless chuckle. "The Russos. Low-level loan sharks. Garbage eaters." He looked at her with a new intensity. "You saved me from my own right hand today. Lorenzo was like a brother to me. If he turned, it means the entire structure of my organization is compromised. I can't trust my guards. I can't trust my captains. He walked closer, leaning down so his face was level with hers. I need eyes that don't belong to this world. I need someone who notices the things others miss. I want to go home, Elleraine said. You can't, Jacob replied bluntly. Lorenzo saw you. He saw you warn me. You are the reason his coup failed. If you walk out that door, you will be dead within the hour to tie up loose ends. Elleraine felt the blood drain from her face. So I'm a prisoner? No, Jacob said. You're an asset, and I protect my assets. He pulled a chair over and sat opposite her. Here is the deal, Elleraine. You stay here. You help me figure out how Lorenzo poisoned that drink, because aconite is rare and it leaves a trail. You help me find the supplier. In exchange, I wipe your father's debt, every cent, and I ensure the Russos never look in his direction again. Elleraine stared at him. It was a deal with the devil, but the devil was offering her the one thing she had prayed for: freedom from her father's mistakes. And if I refuse, then I give you $5,000, put you on a bus to nowhere, and wish you luck. But Lorenzo will find you. Elleraine looked at the skyline of Chicago. She thought about her dad, broken and aging, terrified of every knock at the door. She looked back at Jacob. His eyes were hard, but not cruel. There was a strange desperation in them, a king who had just realized his castle was built on sand. I need to see the glass, Elleraine said softly. Excuse me. The glass from the club. Did you keep it? Jacob smiled, a genuine, rare expression that transformed his face. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy handkerchief. He unfolded it to reveal the crystal tumbler, miraculously unbroken, a small amount of the amber liquid still trapped inside. I never leave evidence behind, Jacob said. Elleraine took the glass carefully. She smelled it. Almond and something metallic. It wasn't just poison, Jacob. It was a binary compound, safe to drink until it mixes with alcohol. She looked up at him. Whoever made this, they are a chemist too, and they are very, very good. Jacob's phone buzzed. He picked it up. He read the text and his jaw tightened. What is it? Elleraine asked. My townhouse just exploded, Jacob said, his voice void of emotion. If we had gone home, we'd be ash. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the burning city lights. The war has started, Elleraine. You'd better get some sleep. Tomorrow we hunt. Elleraine watched him. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But as she watched the silhouette of the most dangerous man in Chicago, she realized something else. She wasn't invisible anymore. The morning sun hit the reinforced glass of the penthouse, bathing the room in a cold grey light. Elleraine hadn't slept. She sat at the sleek granite kitchen island, the crystal tumbler sitting on a paper towel in front of her, like a religious artifact. Jacob walked in. He had showered and changed into a fresh shirt, black and crisp, rolling the sleeves up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and ink. A tattoo of a geometric maze wrapped around his left wrist, a symbol of the syndicate. Coffee, he stated, placing a steaming mug next to her. It wasn't a question. Thank you, she murmured, not looking up from the glass. I need vinegar baking soda and a high-intensity UV light. Do you have a black light? Maybe for checking counterfeit bills? Jacob raised an eyebrow. I deal in wire transfers. Elleraine. But yes, I have a scanner in the safe. He retrieved a heavy handheld device and slid it across the counter. Elleraine dimmed the kitchen lights. She poured a capful of vinegar she had found in the pantry into the dregs of the scotch, waited for the fizz, and then clicked on the UV light. The liquid didn't just glow, it pulsed. A neon, sickly green vein ran through the amber sludge. "My God," Elleraine whispered. "What?" Jacob was beside her instantly, his presence overwhelming. He smelled of soap and danger. "See that striation?" Elleraine pointed with a shaking finger. "That's a chelating agent. It binds the poison to the alcohol molecules so it doesn't sink to the bottom immediately. It delays the reaction. If you had drunk this, you wouldn't have died at the table. You would have died in your car 30 minutes later. It would have looked like a heart attack." Jacob stared at the glowing green liquid. A time-delayed assassination. Smart. It gives the killer time to exit. It's not just smart, Jacob. It's a signature. Elleraine turned off the light. Standard aconite is extracted from plants. It's messy. This is synthesized. It's chemically perfect. There are maybe people in the state who could refine a toxin this pure without killing themselves in the process. Jacob's eyes darkened. Names. I need to run a mass spectrometry test to be sure. I can't do that here. I own a private clinic on the south side. We go there, now. The drive was tense. Dante drove a different car this time, a nondescript sedan. Jacob spent the ride on a burner phone, speaking in rapid-fire Italian. The tone was aggressive. He was closing ranks, freezing accounts, and putting a bounty on Lorenzo's head that would make every hit man in Chicago salivate. When they arrived at the clinic, the staff cleared out immediately at a nod from Jacob. He led Elleraine to the lab in the basement. It was state-of-the-art. Elleraine felt a pang of nostalgia as she pulled on latex gloves and a white coat. For a moment, she wasn't a waitress hiding from loan sharks. She was a scientist again. She took a sample from the glass and injected it into the spectrometer. The machine hummed. Jacob leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her. "You look different in that coat. Different good or different bad?" Elleraine asked, her eyes on the monitor. "Different dangerous," Jacob replied softly. "You wield that pipette like a knife." The machine beeped. A graph spiked on the screen. Elleraine froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale as the coat she wore. "Elleraine!" Jacob stepped forward. "What is it?" "I know who made this," she whispered. "I recognize the bonding agent. He uses a specific isotope of thallium to stabilize the mix. He calls it his artist's signature." "Who?" Jacob's voice was a low growl. "Martin Vane." Jacob paused. "The name sounds familiar. Ivy League dropout, arrested for manufacturing designer drugs in 2019. "He was my fiancé," Elleraine said, her voice breaking. The silence in the room was heavy enough to crush bones. Jacob walked up behind her. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the heat radiating off him. "Your fiancé is trying to kill me." "Ex-fiancé," she corrected, turning to face him. "We were PhD candidates together. He was brilliant but unstable. He started experimenting on animals. Then he wanted to test on people. I turned him in. He got expelled. He swore he'd ruin me." She looked up into Jacob's grey eyes. "He didn't just ruin my career, Jacob. He planted drugs in my apartment. That's why I lost my scholarship. That's why I'm a waitress. Martin Vane took everything from me." Jacob's expression shifted. The suspicion vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying resolve. "Then this works out perfectly," Jacob said. How? Because now, Jacob said, reaching for his gun, we aren't just hunting my enemy. We're hunting yours. And I promise you, Elleraine, when we find him, he will wish he had stayed in prison. He won't be easy to find, Elleraine warned. Martin is paranoid. He works in sterile environments. I know where he is, Jacob said, looking at the chemical printout. Lorenzo has been funneling money into a shell company called Vanguard Storage. I thought it was for weapons. It's a chemical warehouse in the industrial district. If Martin is there, Elleraine said, the place will be booby-trapped. Good. Jacob checked the chamber of his weapon. I like a challenge. The warehouse was a hulking skeleton of rusted iron and corrugated steel sitting on the edge of the Chicago River. The air smelled of rot and industrial waste. Jacob, Dante, and two other enforcers moved like shadows toward the side entrance. Elleraine was positioned in the middle of the formation, wearing a Kevlar vest Jacob had forced onto her. It was heavy and smelled of sweat, but she didn't complain. Stay behind me, Jacob whispered. If shooting starts, you drop. Do not run. Unless I say run. I know the drill, Elleraine whispered back, though her hands were trembling. Dante cut the padlock with bolt cutters. They slipped inside. The interior was vast, filled with shipping containers. But in the center, a large plastic-wrapped clean room had been erected. It glowed with white light, humming with the sound of high-powered ventilation. That's it, Elleraine said. That's a mobile lab. They moved closer. Jacob signaled his men to flank the structure. He moved to the plastic flap that served as a door. He ripped it open, gun raised. Nobody move. The lab was empty. Beakers bubbled on hot plates. A centrifuge was spinning. But there was no Martin. No Lorenzo. Clear! Dante yelled from the other side. Jacob lowered his gun, scanning the room. It's warm. They were just here. Elleraine walked to the main workbench. There was a notebook open. She recognized the handwriting instantly cramped, jagged scrawl. Martin. She read the last entry. Subject JM, dosage insufficient. Increase potency. Delivery method. Aerosol. Jacob. Elleraine spun around. Get out. It's not a lab. It's a... Click. The sound of a heavy mechanical latch echoed through the warehouse. The metal shutters on the high windows slammed shut simultaneously. From the speakers mounted in the rafters, a voice crackled. It was smooth, arrogant, and chillingly familiar to Elleraine. Hello, darling. I see you found a new boyfriend. You always did have a thing for bad boys. Martin! Elleraine screamed at the ceiling. And Mr. Moretti, the voice continued. So kind of you to visit. I'm afraid the hospitality is a bit breathtaking. A hiss filled the room. Vents in the floor opened, spewing a thick yellow gas. Gas! Jacob roared. Masks now! The enforcers pulled gas masks from their tactical bags, but they only had 3. There were 5 of them, including Elleraine. Jacob didn't hesitate. He grabbed the mask from his belt and shoved it over Elleraine's face, pulling the straps tight. Jacob, no. She muffled through the plastic, trying to pull it off. He grabbed her hands, pinning them to her sides. Breathe, he commanded, his eyes locking onto hers. I can hold my breath longer than you. Dante, blow the east wall, Jacob shouted, covering his mouth with his sleeve. The yellow fog was rising fast. It was heavier than air, chlorine gas. It would turn the water in their lungs to acid. Dante slapped a strip of C4 explosive onto the corrugated metal wall. 10 seconds, Dante yelled. Jacob was coughing now. The gas was irritating his eyes, blinding him. He kept a hand on Elloraine's shoulder, anchoring her. Ellorraine looked around the lab. Her mind raced. Chlorine gas. Base neutralizes acid. She ripped her hand away from Jacob and grabbed a large jug of ammonia from the shelf. "Don't," Jacob wheezed, thinking she was panicking. Ellorraine threw the jug of ammonia onto the floor near the vents. The reaction was immediate. White smoke billowed up, creating a barrier, a localized reaction that thinned the chlorine concentration near the floor. It wasn't a cure, but it bought them seconds. Boom! The explosion shattered the world. The east wall peeled open like a sardine can, revealing the night sky. "Go!" Jacob shoved Ellorraine toward the hole. They stumbled out into the fresh, cold air, collapsing onto the concrete. Jacob fell to his knees, retching violently, gasping for oxygen. Ellorraine ripped off her mask. "Jacob!" She crawled over to him. His face was red, his eyes streaming tears. He was wheezing a terrible rattling sound. "Dante!" Ellorraine yelled. "Get the car. He needs oxygen." As the men scrambled, a single shot rang out from the darkness of the roof. Crack! Jacob jerked back a spray of blood, hitting the concrete next to Ellorraine's hand. He collapsed, fully clutching his shoulder. "Jacob!" Ellorraine screamed, pressing her hands over the wound. The blood was dark and hot. From the shadows of the roof, a figure stood up. Lorenzo. He held a sniper rifle. "Sloppy, boss. Very sloppy," Lorenzo shouted down. Dante returned fire, forcing Lorenzo to duck. "We have to move him," Dante roared, grabbing Jacob's legs. They dragged Jacob's semi-conscious body toward the sedan. Ellorraine kept her hands on the wound, feeling the life pulse out of him under her fingers. They threw him into the back seat. Ellorraine jumped in, pulling his head into her lap. "Stay with me," she begged, slapping his cheek lightly. "Stay with me, Jacob." Jacob's eyes fluttered open. They were hazy, unfocused. He looked up at her, blood bubbling at the corner of his lips. "You threw ammonia," he wheezed, a faint, pained smile touching his lips. "Crazy bitch." "Save your breath," she sobbed, tearing her uniform to make a compress. "Ellorraine," he whispered, his hand gripping her wrist weakly. "If I die, you are not going to die. If I die," he insisted, his voice fading. "You take the key, in my shoe. Safe deposit, box 404. Run." "Shut up, Jacob," she cried, pressing harder on the wound. "You're going to live, and you're going to kill them. You promised." His eyes rolled back in his head. His hand went limp, sliding off her wrist. "Drive faster!" Ellorraine screamed at Dante, her voice tearing through the car. But as they sped toward the trauma center, Ellorraine looked out the window. A black van was following them. Then another. Then a motorcycle. The headlights flooded the rear window. "We have company!" Dante yelled, racking his slide. Ellorraine looked down at the dying Mafia king in her lap, then back at the approaching army. She reached down to Jacob's belt and pulled his spare gun. It was heavy cold and terrified her. But she racked the slide just like she'd seen him do. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She wasn't a scientist. She was the only thing standing between Jacob Moretti and the grave. The sedan swerved violently across the median tires, screeching against the asphalt. Dante was driving like a man possessed, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Hold on!" Dante roared. He slammed the brakes, spinning the car 180 degrees. The chasing SUV couldn't react in time and smashed into a parked delivery truck. Metal-crunched glass shattered, and for a brief second, the pursuit was broken. "Ellorraine, check the boss," Dante shouted, accelerating again toward the industrial district. Ellorraine looked down. Jacob was pale, his skin clammy. The bullet had hit his shoulder, but the blood loss was severe. He was drifting in and out of consciousness, muttering names she didn't know, ghosts from a violent past. "He's losing too much blood," Elaine cried, pressing the makeshift compress harder. "We need a hospital." "No hospitals," Dante said grimly. "Lorenzo will have men at every ER in the city. We have to go to the foundry." The foundry? Old steel mill, Moretti territory. It's fortified. 10 minutes later, the car skidded through a rusted chain-link gate. The foundry was a behemoth of decaying brick and iron, looming against the night sky like a dead giant. Dante drove the car straight into the main loading bay, hitting a remote that lowered a heavy steel shutter behind them. Silence fell heavy and suffocating. "Help me get him up," Dante commanded. Together they dragged Jacob out of the car and up a metal staircase to the foreman's office. It was a glass-walled room overlooking the factory floor, dusty but defensible. They laid him on a sturdy wooden table. "I have a med kit," Dante said, ripping open a cabinet. "Field trauma gear. Can you handle it?" Elaine looked at the needle, the thread and the forceps. Her hands were shaking. She dealt with formulas, not flesh. I've dissected frogs. I know anatomy," she stammered. "Pretend he's a frog," Dante said, handing her the tools. "I have to secure the perimeter. They're coming." Dante left, locking the door behind him. Elaine was alone with the King of Chicago. She cut open his shirt. The wound was ugly, a jagged hole near the clavicle. "Okay, Jacob. Stay with me," she whispered. She poured alcohol over the wound. Jacob hissed, his back arching off the table, eyes snapping open. "Easy," she soothed, pushing him down. "I have to stitch it." Jacob looked at her. His vision was swimming, but he saw her face determined, terrified and beautiful. "Do it," he gritted out. Elaine worked. She pushed the needle through the tough skin, tying off the bleeders. It took 20 minutes of agonizing precision. When she tied the last knot, her hands were slick with his blood. Jacob let out a long breath, his color slightly better. He reached up with his good hand and touched her face, smearing a streak of blood on her cheek. "You didn't run," he rasped. "I couldn't find the key in your shoe," she joked weakly, tears prickling her eyes. "You're a terrible liar, Elaine." Boom! The building shook. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Dante's voice crackled over the intercom on the wall. "Boss, they're here. 3 SUVs. They just blew the main gate. I count 12 shooters plus Lorenzo. And there's a guy in a hazmat suit." Martin. Jacob tried to sit up, but pain slammed him back down. "My gun. Give me my gun." "You can't even lift your arm," Elaine shouted. "I can pull a trigger," Jacob snarled. "I will not die lying on a table." Elaine handed him his Sig Sauer. He checked the magazine with trembling hands. "What do we do?" Elaine asked. Jacob looked at the monitors showing the factory floor below. Shadows were moving between the rusted machines. "We hold the high ground," Jacob said. "This office is bulletproof glass, but they will breach the stairs eventually. Dante can hold the choke point for maybe 10 minutes. And then we fight until the magazine is empty." Elaine looked out at the vast, dark factory floor. She saw the rusted vats, the old conveyor belts, and the rows of pressurized tanks used for welding and cutting steel. Acetylene. Oxygen. Her mind shifted gears. She stopped seeing a battlefield and started seeing a chemistry equation. "Jacob," she said, her voice changing. It was the voice she used when she solved a complex molecular problem. "How many rounds does Dante have? Enough for a skirmish, not a war. Why?" "Tell him to stop shooting," Elleraine said. "What?" "Tell him to fall back to the upper catwalks. Let them in." Jacob stared at her. "Are you insane? If we let them onto the floor, they'll surround us." "No," Elleraine said, her eyes blazing with a cold, sharp intelligence. "If we let them onto the floor, they're standing in the middle of a bomb." She pointed to the tanks below. "That's industrial-grade acetylene, and over there bags of powdered limestone. If I mix the right ratio of gas with the air and use the limestone dust to amplify the combustion." She looked at Jacob. "I don't need a gun, Jacob. I need a spark." The shooting stopped. The silence in the foundry was more terrifying than the gunfire. Lorenzo's voice echoed up from the factory floor, amplified by a megaphone. "Jacob, come on out, old friend. It's over. You're bleeding out. Be reasonable. Sign the territory over to the Russo family and I'll make it quick." Another voice joined in higher nasally. "And send the girl down," Martin shouted. "You have something that belongs to me, Jacob. Send Elleraine down and I might let you live." Up in the office, Elleraine was moving frantically. She had broken the glass casing of the fire alarm system and was stripping the wires. "What are you doing?" Jacob asked. He was sitting up now, leaning heavily against the desk gun trained on the door. "Creating a remote detonator," she muttered, twisting copper wires together. Dante opened the valves on the acetylene tanks on the ground floor, like I asked. He did. He's up on the north catwalk now. Good. The gas is heavier than air initially, but it will mix. The concentration needs to be about 8%. If it's too high, it won't explode. It will just burn. We have to wait. Wait for what? For them to get deeper inside. Elleraine finished rigging the wires to a 9-volt battery she'd found in a drawer. She held the two ends of the wire apart. "I'm going out there," Elleraine said. Jacob grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak but desperate. "No, absolutely not. They need to see me, Jacob. They need to be distracted so they don't smell the gas. And I need to get Martin to step into the kill zone." "Elleraine, trust me," she said, leaning down and kissing him on the forehead. It was a shock to both of them. "You trust my chemistry, right? Trust my math." She pulled away, grabbed a handheld radio, and walked out of the bulletproof office onto the metal balcony overlooking the factory floor. Below her, 12 men stood in the shadows of the machinery. Lorenzo was in the center. Martin stood behind him wearing a gas mask, looking like a dystopian insect. "Hello, Martin," Elleraine called out. Her voice rang clear and steady in the cavernous space. The men raised their rifles. "Hold fire!" Martin screamed. "Don't shoot her!" Elleraine gripped the railing. She could smell the faint garlic-like odor of the acetylene wafting up. It was getting strong. "You look terrible, Elleraine," Martin sneered, stepping forward. He took off his mask to gloat. "Waitress uniform." "Really? I told you you'd amount to nothing without me." "And you look like you're working for the circus," Elleraine shot back. "Tell me, Martin, did you figure out the bonding agent for the aconite yourself, or did you steal that from Professor Halloway's notes too?" Martin's face twisted in rage. "I am a genius. I perfected it. You're a hack," she said calmly. She watched as the men moved closer, clustering around Martin and Lorenzo right in the center of the floor, right next to the open valves. "Enough talk!" Lorenzo shouted, raising his rifle toward the office window where Jacob was hidden. "Come down here, Elleraine, or we turn your boyfriend into Swiss cheese." "I'm coming," Elleraine said. She took a step back toward to the office door. "Where are you going?" Martin yelled. "I forgot my purse," Elleraine said dryly. She stepped inside the office and slammed the heavy door, locking it. "Now!" she screamed at Jacob. "Get down!" Jacob dragged himself under the heavy oak desk. Elleraine dove beside him, curling into a ball covering her ears. She touched the 2 copper wires to the battery terminals, connected to the spark gap she had thrown onto the balcony. Zzz-t. For a microsecond there was nothing. Then the air ignited. It wasn't just an explosion, it was a pressure wave. The acetylene mixed perfectly with the dust in the air, turned the entire ground floor of the foundry into a thermobaric weapon. Kaboom! The glass walls of the office shattered inward, but the heavy oak desk protected them from the shrapnel. The building groaned as if it were being ripped apart. The heat was intense, a sudden blast of furnace air that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Then silence. Elleraine coughed, waving away the dust. "Jacob, I'm here," he groaned. He was covered in glass shards, but alive. They stood up slowly. The office was a wreck. The door was blown off its hinges. Elleraine walked to the edge of the balcony. The factory floor was a scene from hell. Machinery was twisted. Fires burned in small pockets. The squad of hitmen was gone. The force of the blast had incapacitated or killed everyone in the epicenter. But not everyone was dead. Lorenzo, who had been standing behind a heavy pillar, was stumbling through the smoke. His clothes were torn, his face blackened with soot. He was coughing violently, dragging one leg. He looked up and saw Elleraine. He raised his pistol. "You! Witch!" Lorenzo screamed, aiming at her. Bang! The shot didn't come from Lorenzo. Lorenzo's head snapped back. He crumpled to the floor, motionless. Elleraine turned. Jacob was standing in the doorway of the office. He was leaning against the frame, his face grey, but the Sig Sauer in his hand was smoking. A perfect shot from 50 yards with a bullet in his shoulder. "Nobody," Jacob whispered, "threatens my queen." He dropped the gun and collapsed. "Jacob!" Elleraine rushed to him, catching him before he hit the ground. "Dante!" she yelled into the radio. "Dante, get down here! It's clear!" Dante appeared on the catwalk above, looking down at the devastation with wide eyes. "Holy mother of... Get the car!" Elleraine ordered, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "We're going to the safe house. The real one." As Dante scrambled to get the vehicle, Elleraine held Jacob. He was unconscious again, his breathing shallow. She looked down at the factory floor. Martin was nowhere to be seen. Had he been vaporized, or had he slithered away? She didn't care. Not right now. She had won the battle. But as she looked at the man in her arms, she knew the war was far from over. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't running away from it. She was running toward it. 3 weeks had passed since the foundry burned. The recovery had been slow. Jacob spent 10 days in a medically induced coma within his private clinic, monitored by a team of surgeons who were paid enough to forget they ever saw him. Elleraine never left his side. She slept in the chair next to his bed, reviewing his business ledgers by day and holding his hand by night. When he finally woke up, the first thing he saw was Elleraine. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform. She was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, her hair sharp and styled, reading a dossier on the Rosso family's remaining assets. "You fired my accountant," was the first thing Jacob rasped, his voice rough from disuse. Elleraine looked up, a smile touching her lips. He was skimming off the top. "I found the discrepancy in the Cayman accounts. I hired a new one. She's better." Jacob tried to laugh, but it ended in a grimace of pain. So you're running the syndicate now? Someone had to keep the sharks away while the king was sleeping, she said, pouring him a glass of water. The Russos are finished. With Lorenzo dead and their best soldiers buried in the foundry rubble, they surrendered. They ceded the north side to you yesterday. Jacob took the water. He looked at her with a mix of awe and something deeper, something that terrified him more than a bullet. And Martin? Jacob asked. Eloraine's face hardened. Dante searched the ruins. They found DNA but no body. We assume he was vaporized, or he crawled away to die. Jacob set the glass down. Help me up. You need to rest. I have rested enough. I have a gift for you. It's waiting at the penthouse. The return to the penthouse was different this time. Elloraine wasn't a guest or a prisoner. She was the lady of the house. The guards nodded to her with genuine respect. They knew who had rigged the explosion. They knew who had saved the Don. Jacob, leaning heavily on a cane, led her not to the living room, but to the elevator. He pressed a button that wasn't there before a biometric scanner that read his thumbprint. The elevator descended past the garage, deep into the foundation of the building. I told you I protect my assets, Jacob said, as the doors opened. The room was stark, soundproofed concrete. In the center, bound to a metal chair, sat a man. He was burned, bandaged, and looked half-starved. It was Martin. Elloraine stopped cold. You found him. Dante found him 2 miles down the river, trying to steal a boat, Jacob said coldly. I told Dante not to kill him. I told him that pleasure belongs to you. Martin looked up. His arrogance was gone, replaced by trembling fear. One side of his face was heavily bandaged from the burns. Elloraine, Martin croaked. Elloraine, please. I was sick. You know I was sick. We were partners once. Elloraine walked toward him. The sound of her heels on the concrete was the only noise in the room. She looked down at the man who had ruined her life, the man who had tried to kill the only person who had ever protected her. She turned to Jacob. Give me your gun. Jacob pulled the Sig Sauer from his holster and handed it to her handle first. Elloraine weighed the gun in her hand. It was cold, heavy. She aimed it at Martin's forehead. Martin squeezed his eyes shut, sobbing. Please, I can make you rich. I have formulas. I have the aconite synthesis. Elloraine stared at him. She thought about the fear she had lived in for 2 years. The debt. The shame. Then she lowered the gun. No, Elloraine said. Martin opened his eyes, hope flooding his face. Thank you. Thank you, Elloraine. I'm not going to kill you, Martin, Elloraine said, her voice devoid of emotion, because death is too quick, and you crave attention too much. You want to be the genius who died a villain. She turned to Jacob. He cares about his intellect more than his life. Destroy his work. Jacob nodded. Already done. We wiped his servers. We burned his journals. We planted evidence that his breakthroughs were plagiarized from a first-year undergrad student. By tomorrow morning, the scientific community will think Martin Vane was a fraud who never had an original thought in his life. And then? Elloraine asked. And then, Jacob said, taking the gun back. We hand him over to the Russos' remaining cousins. I told them Martin was the one who betrayed Lorenzo. Martin screamed. No, they'll torture me, kill me, just kill me. Elloraine turned her back on him. She walked to the elevator, pressing the button. Goodbye, Martin, she said. As the elevator doors closed, shutting out his screams, Jacob took her hand. That was cold, Jacob said, looking at her with admiration. I had a good teacher, Elloraine replied. 1 week later, the obsidian room reopened. The jazz was playing, the champagne was flowing, and the city's elite were in attendance. When the doors opened, the room went silent. Jacob Moretti walked in. He walked with a slight limp, but he looked more powerful than ever. And on his arm was Elleraine. She wore a gown of emerald green silk, the color of the poison she had identified. She didn't look down. She met every gaze, the politicians, the rival bosses, the police captains. They sat at the owner's booth. Rick, the bartender, who had tried to poison Jacob, was gone, replaced by a man Dante trusted with his life. The new bartender brought a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir. He poured 2 glasses. Jacob lifted his glass. He looked at Elleraine, his eyes softening in a way the world would never see. "To the whisper," Jacob said. Elleraine clinked her glass against his. "To the architect." "You know," Jacob said, leaning in his voice low. "You never did tell me why you really did it. Why did you save me that night? You could have let me drink it and walked away." Elleraine took a sip of the wine, smiling over the rim of the glass. "Because," she whispered, leaning into his ear, just like she had that first night. "I took one look at you, Jacob Moretti, and I realized that life was too boring without a little trouble." Jacob laughed, a rich, genuine sound that echoed through the club. He kissed her hand, signaling to the room and to the city that the king had found his queen. And in the shadows of Chicago, nobody dared to whisper a threat against them ever again. The story of Jacob and Elleraine reminds us that sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest consequences. A single whisper in a crowded room didn't just save a man's life. It toppled an empire and forged an unbreakable bond. Elleraine started as a victim of her circumstances, invisible, afraid, and trapped by debts that weren't hers. But through her intelligence and courage, she proved that power isn't just about muscle or guns. It's about observation, knowledge, and the will to act when everyone else is frozen. In the end, the waitress didn't just serve the boss. She saved him, and in doing so, she saved herself. Wow, what a journey. If your heart was racing during that chemical explosion scene, hit that like button right now. I want to know what you think. Did Elleraine make the right choice with Martin? Should she have pulled the trigger, or was erasing his legacy a better punishment? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more gripping stories about crime, romance, and the dark underworld, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.